In Beverly Hills, a Hollywood legend nearing his twilight was about to blur the line between spectacle and survival. What began as a talk show boast beneath hot studio lights turned deadly when the name Chuck Norris stopped being a punchline and became a promise. Thomas Cruise, Mapother 4, wasn't your typical actor chasing relevance. For nearly 40 years, he'd been the face of fearless cinema, trained by pilots, soldiers, and stuntmen, and known for risking his life to prove every frame was real. When Norris answered Cruise's challenge with calm acceptance, the world saw a publicity stunt. But Chuck saw a student who didn't yet know he was walking into a lesson written in bone and breath. Cruise's first strike would awaken a reality no camera could choreograph, and Norris's counter would echo far beyond the mat. What began as a charity exhibition would become a confrontation between performance and presence. And Los Angeles, the city where illusion is currency, would never forget the night Tom Cruise learned what real meant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The studio lights burned hot against Tom Cruise's skin as he leaned forward in his chair, that trademark grin splitting his face. The audience of The Night Show with Jimmy Carson hung on his every word, an energy he'd cultivated across decades of stardom. They weren't just fans, they were witnesses to his legend. So these stunts in terminal velocity, you actually did that helicopter sequence yourself? Jimmy asked, his eyes wide with practiced awe. Tom laughed, the sound practiced yet genuine. Every second of it. Broke 2 fingers, sprained my ankle, and the studio execs nearly had heart attacks. But that's the difference between saying you did something and actually doing it. The audience erupted in applause. Tom basked in it, feeling that familiar rush, the validation he chased across rooftops, down cliff faces, and through decades of blockbusters. You know, Jimmy continued, leaning in conspiratorially, there's been this ongoing debate online about action stars, old school versus new school, people arguing about who's more authentic. Well, the game's changed, Tom replied, his confidence rising. Those old school guys, they had their time, but modern action is different. We've evolved past the days of slow punches and fake sweat. A collective, ooh, rippled through the audience. Even someone like, say, Chuck Norris? Jimmy asked, eyebrows raised. The name hung in the air. Tom felt a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps, but it was quickly subsumed by the heat of the spotlight and the addiction of audience approval. Chuck's a legend, no question, Tom said, his voice taking on that diplomatic tone he'd perfected in 1,000 interviews. Then something shifted in him, a need to assert, to claim territory. But honestly, I'd go around with Chuck any day. These days, my training's on another level. The audience gasped, then erupted. Jimmy's eyes widened. This was television gold, unplanned, and electric. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first, Jimmy shouted over the noise. Tom Cruise just challenged Chuck Norris to a fight. Tom laughed it off, raising his hands in mock surrender. I'm just saying, the methods have evolved. No disrespect to the legends. But the damage was done. The challenge hung in the air, a soundbite destined for viral immortality. 3 days later, in his private gym in Beverly Hills, Tom was in the middle of a punishing workout when his phone buzzed. His publicist, Evelyn, was calling. Have you seen it? She asked, skipping the pleasantries. Seen what? Tom grunted, setting down his weights. Chuck Norris responded to your challenge. Tom felt his stomach tighten. What did he say? Nothing much. Just, some lessons are best learned in person. It's gone viral. Every outlet is running with it. Tom walked to the window, staring out at the perfect Los Angeles day. It was just talk show banter, Eve. Well, it's more than banter now. Alex Rivera called. He's organizing that big martial arts charity gala next month. Wants to know if you'd consider a friendly exhibition match with Chuck. For charity. Tom's reflection stared back at him in the glass. Still fit at 60. Still defying expectations. The man who did his own stunts. The authentic action star. Tom, this is where you say absolutely not. But something was stirring in him. That same recklessness that had propelled him off buildings. The need to prove something that had driven him his entire career. What if I said yes? He heard himself ask. The silence on the other end was deafening. You can't be serious, Evelyn finally said. But he was. In that moment, Tom Cruise, the man who had spent a lifetime blurring the line between performance and reality, felt a new challenge taking shape, not just to entertain, but to prove. Call Michael Briggs, he said. I need to start training. Michael Ironjaw. Briggs stood in Tom's home gym 2 days later, his weathered face a mask of concern. At 65, the veteran stunt coordinator had seen Hollywood's bravest come and go. He'd worked with Tom for over 20 years, choreographing the impossible and making movie magic look real. This is different, Tom, Michael said, watching his friend hammer the punching bag. This isn't a stunt, it's not choreographed, it's not safe. Tom didn't break rhythm, his fists connecting with practiced precision. I know what I'm doing. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. No, you don't. I've worked with actors and fighters my whole life. They're different animals. I've trained with the best for decades. Navy pilots for Top Gun. Special Forces for Mission Impossible. Michael grabbed the bag, stopping Tom's assault. For movies, Tom. For scenes where everyone knows their part. His eyes were hard with concern. Chuck Norris doesn't read scripts. He reads opponents. Tom wiped sweat from his brow, irritation flickering across his face. You think I can't handle myself? I think you're confusing performing fights with fighting. Michael sighed. Look, I'll train you. God knows someone has to. But understand this. Real fighters don't play for cameras. And Chuck Norris? He's as real as they come. Tom turned away, staring at his reflection in the mirrored wall. The man looking back was Tom Cruise, action star, capable, confident, unconquerable. Not the teenager from Syracuse who once dreamed of being taken seriously. Not the young actor fighting for respect. Not the middle-aged man who pushed his body to extremes to prove his commitment. Then I guess it's time I got real too, he said. Across Los Angeles, at a modest dojo in Culver City, Chuck Norris knelt in meditation. The space around him was quiet, save for the soft breathing of his students. Veterans with PTSD, kids from troubled neighborhoods, people seeking balance rather than aggression. At 85, Chuck Norris moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man, his legendary status worn as lightly as his faded black G. When his phone vibrated against the wooden floor, he opened his eyes slowly, centering himself before answering. Mr. Norris? It's Alex Rivera, from the Martial Arts Charity Foundation. I'm calling about Tom Cruise's challenge. Chuck listened silently, his weathered face revealing nothing. When the call ended, his senior student Marcus approached cautiously. Everything okay, Sensei? Chuck placed the phone down with deliberate care. It seems Tom Cruise wants to spar at the charity event next month. The students exchanged glances. Marcus frowned. You're not seriously considering it? Chuck rose to his feet with fluid ease. Some people learn through words, he said quietly. Others need experience. But Sensei, he's just an actor playing for publicity. Chuck's eyes, sharp despite his years, focused on a point beyond the dojo walls. Then perhaps this is an opportunity for something more than publicity. He turned to his students with the hint of a smile. Sometimes, lessons need an audience. As news of the Showdown of Legends exploded across social media, two men on opposite sides of Los Angeles began preparing for an encounter neither fully understood. One driven by the need to prove, the other by the wisdom to teach. The sharp crack of bone against leather echoed through Tom's private gym. Sweat poured down his face as he drove another combination into the heavy bag. 3 weeks had passed since he'd accepted the challenge, and with each passing day, the reality of what awaited him grew more concrete. Again, Michael Briggs commanded from the side, his voice betraying no emotion. And this time, keep your guard up. Your right side's open every time you throw that hook. Tom reset his stance, ignoring the burning in his shoulders. The training had intensified beyond anything he'd done for films. No breaks for camera resets. No carefully choreographed sequences designed to make him look good. Just hour after hour of raw, punishing work. You're still telegraphing, Michael said, stepping forward to demonstrate. In the movies, that dramatic wind-up looks great on camera. In real life, it gets you countered. Tom nodded, frustration building beneath his practiced composure. He was used to being the best, to mastering whatever challenge came his way through sheer will and work ethic. But this was different. His body, despite decades of discipline, was fighting against new patterns, new truths. Let's bring Julian in, Michael said, gesturing to the young MMA fighter waiting by the door. Tom felt his stomach tighten. Sparring had become the most humbling part of his days. Julian was half his age, a rising welterweight with lightning hands. Each session had ended the same way, with Tom on the defensive, his movie training proving inadequate against actual fighting technique. Remember, Michael said as they touched gloves, forget everything you learned for the cameras. Real fighting is messier, tighter, less visual. The buzzer sounded. Julian circled, his movements efficient and predatory. Tom maintained his guard, trying to implement weeks of new training against years of cinematic muscle memory. Julian feinted left, then snapped a quick jab that caught Tom on the cheek, not hard enough to damage, but sharp enough to sting his pride. Counter, don't retreat, Michael called. Tom surged forward, throwing a combination that felt powerful. Julian slipped the first punch, blocked the second, and caught Tom with a clean counter that sent him stumbling backward. Stop, Michael called. Tom, you're still fighting for the camera. There is no camera. Tom's frustration boiled over. I've been doing my own stunts for 30 years. And that's the problem, Michael replied, his voice level. You've spent decades learning how to make fights look real. Chuck spent his life making fights be real. Different worlds. Tom grabbed a towel, wiping sweat from his face to hide the doubt creeping in. On film sets, he was in control. Each sequence was rehearsed until perfect. Each move designed to showcase his abilities. Here, in this gym with no audience but his trainer and a fighter half his age, he felt the illusion slipping. We've got 3 more weeks, Michael said, softer now. But Tom, you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't a villain you defeat in the 3rd act. This is Chuck Norris. Tom stared at his reflection in the wall. Mirror still fit, still determined, but for the first time in years, uncertain. Across Los Angeles, in the humble dojo where Chuck Norris had taught for the past 15 years. A different kind of training unfolded. The ancient master moved through his morning kata with fluid precision, each movement perfected through 70 years of dedicated practice. Unlike Tom's high-tech gym with its array of equipment and specialists, Chuck's preparation consisted mostly of what it always had: disciplined routine and inner focus. "Sensei," Marcus said from the doorway. "The reporters are outside again." Chuck completed his form before acknowledging his student. "Tell them what you always do." That Chuck Norris doesn't train to fight Tom Cruise. He trains to master himself. A faint smile crossed Chuck's weathered face. "And they never listen." Marcus lingered, concern evident. "Are you sure about this exhibition? The media's turning it into a circus." Chuck moved to a worn wooden bench, sitting with the easy grace that had become his signature. "Come, sit." Marcus joined his teacher, waiting for wisdom he knew would come. "Do you know why I accepted this challenge?" Chuck asked. "To teach him a lesson about respect?" Chuck shook his head slowly. "Tom Cruise doesn't need to learn about respect. He needs to learn about himself." He glanced toward the door where, beyond, cameras waited to capture any glimpse of his preparation. For a man who has spent his life in front of cameras, Tom sees very little. "I don't understand, Sensei." He has confused the performance of strength with strength itself, the appearance of mastery with actual mastery. Chuck's eyes, clear and sharp despite his years, focused on a group of young students entering for their morning class. Perhaps, in his way, he is seeking truth. My job is not to punish him for that. "Then what is your job?" Chuck stood, adjusting his guy. "To show him the difference between looking strong and being strong." He turned toward his waiting students. "Now, enough about Tom Cruise. We have real work to do." The contrast between their preparations could not have been more stark. While Tom surrounded himself with specialists, nutritionists, fighting coaches, physical therapists, Chuck simply continued the practices that had defined his life for decades. One man built a training camp, the other maintained a way of life. As media interest intensified, Dana Lee, the former champion turned commentator assigned to broadcast the event, found herself increasingly drawn to the philosophical dimensions of the matchup. "This isn't just about physical prowess," she told her producer during a pre-event meeting. "This is about two different approaches to discipline and authenticity." "Save the philosophy for the broadcast," her producer replied. "The audience wants action, not analysis." Dana shook her head. "You're missing what makes this compelling. Cruise has spent decades proving he's for real, by doing his own stunts. Now, he's stepping into the ultimate test of that identity. And you think he'll fail?" Dana considered the question carefully. "I think he'll learn. Whether that feels like failure or enlightenment depends on him." 2 weeks before the event, Tom stood in his bathroom, assessing the damage from the day's training. A purple bruise bloomed across his ribs where Julian had landed a particularly sharp kick. His cheekbone throbbed from a jab he hadn't slipped in time. Michael Briggs appeared in the doorway behind him, concern etched across his face. "You're pushing too hard." "Not hard enough," Tom replied, wincing as he applied ointment to his ribs. "I'm still not ready." "Tom," Michael said carefully, "you'll never be ready in the way you're thinking. Not in a few weeks." Tom turned, frustration flashing in his eyes. "So what are you saying? That I should back out? That I can't do this?" Michael stepped forward, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. "I'm saying you need to change your goal. You walked into this thinking you could become a fighter in a month. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Tom demanded. You need to understand that there's honor in the attempt, in the willingness to step into that ring knowing you're outmatched. The victory isn't in beating Chuck Norris, it's in facing him with dignity. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Tom turned back to the mirror, studying his reflection, the face known to millions. The body pushed beyond normal limits year after year to maintain the illusion of the indomitable action hero. What if I can't? He asked quietly. Michael's reflection met his in the mirror. Can't what? Except being outmatched. I've spent my whole career pushing beyond limits, defying expectations. Then this might be the most important fight of your life, Michael replied. Just not for the reasons you think. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tom found himself watching old footage of Chuck Norris. Not the Walker, Texas Ranger episodes or his action films, but competition footage from the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds. What struck him wasn't the obvious skill, but the calm in Chuck's eyes. Even in the heat of combat, there was a centeredness, a presence that transcended the physical contest. On his phone, a news alert appeared. Countdown to Cruz versus Norris, the showdown of legends. Tom stared at the screen, the magnitude of what he'd set in motion finally sinking in. He wasn't just fighting a man, he was confronting a lifetime of questions about authenticity, about the blurred line between the characters he portrayed and the man he truly was. He thought of the moment that had started this, that casual boast on a talk show, the easy confidence born of decades of carefully managed challenges. For the first time, he wondered if Michael was right. Perhaps the real test wasn't whether he could match Chuck Norris, but whether he could face his own limitations with grace. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, two men prepared for an encounter that had become far more than a publicity stunt. One sought truth through humility, the other through courage. Both paths would converge in 2 weeks' time, before an audience that expected spectacle but might witness something far more profound. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom had been transformed into an arena of light and anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables where Hollywood royalty mingled with martial arts legends. At the center, a regulation fighting mat replaced the usual dance floor, stark white under focused spotlights, waiting. Outside, red carpet arrivals created the expected frenzy. Limousines disgorged celebrities while photographers shouted for attention and fans pressed against security barriers. The charity gala had become the hottest ticket in town, with proceeds benefiting veterans programs and youth martial arts initiatives. Alex Rivera, resplendent in a designer tuxedo, worked the media line with practiced enthusiasm. "This is beyond our expectations," he told an Entertainment Tonight reporter. "We've raised over $2 million already. And the fights haven't even started." Inside, Dana Lee adjusted her earpiece, reviewing notes for her commentary position. Unlike the polished hyperbole of her colleagues, her preparation focused on the substance beneath the spectacle. "Testing. 1 to 2, she said, leaning toward her microphone. "Dana Lee. Ready at commentator position 1. Her producer's voice crackled in her ear. "We've got Cruz arriving at the red carpet. Chuck's car is 3 minutes out. We go live in 30. Dana nodded, scanning the rapidly filling room. The energy was unlike anything she'd felt before. Not quite a sporting event, not quite a movie premiere, but something hovering between worlds. Just as the night's main attraction blurred the lines between performance and reality, Tom Cruise's arrival created the expected surge of flashbulbs and shouted questions. He emerged from his limousine in fighting attire that somehow managed to look both authentic and camera-ready, professional-grade gloves, a fitted rash guard that emphasized his famously maintained physique, lightweight training pants tapered at the ankles. "Tom, over here. Are you nervous?" a reporter called. Tom flashed his trademark smile, waving to fans as Michael Briggs guided him through the gauntlet of media. "Just excited to support such a great cause," he replied. The consummate professional. "Any message for Chuck Norris?" Tom's smile flickered for just a moment, a microsecond of vulnerability few would notice. "Just grateful for the opportunity to share the mat with a legend." As he moved toward the entrance, the crowd's attention suddenly shifted. A modest black SUV had pulled up, and from it emerged Chuck Norris, unassuming in a simple gray tracksuit, his movements unhurried yet precise. Unlike Tom's media-trained approach, Chuck moved through the photographers with minimal acknowledgement, his focus seemingly elsewhere. "Chuck, Chuck, look this way." The photographers' calls grew more insistent as he passed without playing to their cameras. The contrast was immediate and telling. Tom had arrived as Tom Cruise the star. Chuck arrived as himself, neither amplifying nor diminishing his presence for the occasion. Inside, their paths converged in the green room. Tom, surrounded by his team, was reviewing last-minute strategy when Chuck entered alone. The room fell silent. Tom stepped forward, hand extended. "Chuck, thanks for doing this." Chuck took his hand with a firm grip, his eyes clear and evaluating. "Tom, just the name. No elaboration, no platitudes." The simplicity of the response created an awkward pause that Tom rushed to fill. "I've been training hard. Hope I can make it interesting for the crowd." Chuck's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes shifted, perhaps recognition of the chasm between their understandings of what lay ahead. "I'm sure you have," he replied, then moved past toward his preparation area. Michael Briggs watched the exchange with growing concern. He pulled Tom aside, keeping his voice low. "Remember what we talked about. This isn't about winning." Tom nodded, but his eyes followed Chuck. The living legend, moving with quiet confidence, unbothered by cameras or expectations. "He's not your co-star," Michael added. "He's the real thing." Tom's jaw tightened. "So am I." From her commentary position, Dana Lee watched the room fill with anticipation. Her microphone activated, and she began setting the stage for viewers at home. "Good evening, and welcome to the Martial Arts Benefit Gala, where tonight, two legends from different worlds will meet in an unprecedented exhibition match." The camera pulled in tight on her face as she continued. "On paper, this is a friendly sparring match for charity. But make no mistake, what we're about to witness goes deeper than entertainment." Tom Cruise, the actor famous for performing his own stunts, steps into the real world of combat against Chuck Norris, a man whose legend transcends his films. The director cut to footage of both men arriving, then back to Dana. Two philosophies are about to meet on that mat. One speaks loudly, the other moves quietly. One performs strength, the other embodies it. In the preparation areas, on opposite sides of the ballroom, both men made their final preparations. Tom was surrounded by his team, Michael checking his gloves, a physical therapist warming up his shoulders, Evelyn reviewing last-minute publicity points. "Remember, this is an exhibition," she said. "Keep it light, entertaining. The press will be watching your every move." Tom nodded mechanically, but his focus had narrowed to a laser point. The noise of the crowd, the flashing cameras, even his team's voices had receded behind the pounding of his heartbeat in his ears. This moment, it wasn't about publicity anymore. It had become something personal. A test he hadn't realized he'd been working toward his entire career. Across the room, Chuck sat alone in quiet meditation. Eyes closed. Breath measured. No team, no last-minute adjustments, just the stillness he'd cultivated through decades of discipline. Alex Rivera's voice boomed through the sound system, cutting through the buzz of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. It's time for the main event of our evening, the exhibition match you've all been waiting for." The lights dimmed, leaving only the fighting mat illuminated in the center of the room. A dramatic video package played on screens throughout the venue. Highlights of Tom's movie stunts, intercut with Chuck's tournament victories and film moments. Introducing first, the announcer called as the video concluded, a Hollywood icon known for pushing the boundaries of action filmmaking, performing his own stunts across a legendary career. Tom Cruise! Spotlights swept the room, settling on Tom as he moved toward the mat, acknowledging the applause with raised hands. He looked every inch the action star, confident, camera-ready, physically impressive. And his opponent, the announcer continued as the applause subsided, a true pioneer of martial arts in America, six-time world karate champion and cultural icon, Chuck Norris. The room erupted again as Chuck walked calmly to the mat, his expression unchanged by the adulation. Where Tom had played to the crowd, Chuck simply acknowledged them with a small nod before taking his position. As both men stood facing each other, the contrast was striking. Tom, despite his years, vibrated with barely contained energy. Chuck, 25 years his senior, emanated stillness, his presence more powerful for its restraint. Dana's voice provided context for viewers. What you're seeing is more than a generation gap. It's a fundamental difference in approach. Tom Cruise has spent decades proving himself physically on screen. Chuck Norris proved himself in competition long before becoming a screen legend. The referee called both men to the center, explaining the exhibition rules. 3 2-minute rounds. Light to medium contact only. This is a demonstration, not a competition bout. Tom nodded eagerly. Chuck's expression never changed. Touch gloves and return to your corners, the referee instructed. Their gloves met briefly. As they turned away, Chuck spoke quietly, just for Tom's ears. Remember why we're here. Tom, already focused on the coming exchange, barely registered the words. In his mind, there was only one reason to prove himself against a legend. To show the world, and perhaps himself, that his physical prowess was more than camera tricks and careful editing. The referee stepped back. The timer buzzed. And as the two men moved toward center mat, the real test one neither fully understood finally began. The first seconds unfolded like a physical manifestation of their contrasting philosophies. Tom burst forward with explosive energy, covering distance with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades making aggression look good on camera. His first combination, a jab, cross, hook, was technically perfect. The movements honed through thousands of repetitions. Chuck, in contrast, barely seemed to move. With subtle shifts of weight and position, he let Tom's attacks pass harmlessly through empty space. Where Tom was all forward momentum and cinematic power, Chuck was economy and timing, expending only what was necessary. The crowd, expecting either a carefully choreographed exchange or a quick humiliation, fell into confused murmurs. This was neither. It was a master class in different languages of movement. What we're seeing, Dana Lee explained to viewers, is the fundamental difference between fighting for the camera and fighting for effectiveness. Tom's movements are bigger, designed to read visually. Chuck's are minimal, focused on result rather than appearance. Tom pressed forward, frustration building as his attacks moves that had looked devastating in films seemed to evaporate before making contact. Chuck continued his effortless evasion, occasionally adding slight redirections that left Tom off balance without ever appearing aggressive. Midway through the first round, Tom finally connected a glancing blow to Chuck's shoulder as the older man shifted. The contact, minor as it was, sent a surge of confidence through Tom. He pressed harder, his combinations becoming more elaborate, more determined. Chuck's expression never changed, but something shifted in his approach. Rather than simply evading, he began adding subtle counters, a light tap to the ribs here, a gentle redirection there. Nothing showy, nothing aggressive, but each touch a message. I could do more if I chose to. From ringside, Michael Briggs watched with growing concern. He recognized what the crowd didn't, that Chuck was holding back enormously, treating this less as combat and more as education. As the first round neared its end, Tom launched into his most ambitious combination, yet a spinning technique straight from one of his action films. Chuck, seeing the telegraphed movement, simply stepped inside the spin and placed a perfectly timed open palm against Tom's chest. The light contact was enough. Tom's momentum combined with the precisely placed counter sent him stumbling backward, fighting for balance. He didn't fall, but the message was clear to everyone watching. Chuck was in complete control. The buzzer sounded. Round 1 was over. Tom returned to his corner, breathing hard more from frustration than exertion. "I can't touch him," he muttered to Michael. "You're fighting a movie fight against a real fighter," Michael replied, offering water. "Notice how he never moves more than he needs to? No wasted energy, no showmanship." "So what do I do?" Michael's eyes were serious. "Stop performing. Start listening to what he's teaching you." Across the mat, Chuck sat calmly, declining water or coaching. His breathing was unchanged, his focus internal rather than on his opponent or the crowd. "Round 2 of this exhibition match?" the announcer called. "Beginning now." Tom approached more cautiously this time, his initial rush of confidence tempered by the first round's lesson. He circled, measuring distance, trying to read Chuck's intentions in his positioning. Chuck, for the first time, took initiative. He moved forward with such subtle efficiency that Tom found himself retreating before fully registering the advance. A light combination so compact and precise it was almost invisible to untrained observers tapped Tom's defenses. Not punishing, but probing. Testing. Tom countered instinctively, falling back on decades of training for the screen. His movements remained bigger than necessary, optimized for visual impact rather than efficiency. Chuck slipped inside his guard again, this time placing a controlled strike to Tom's ribs, just enough pressure to register. "Feel the difference?" Chuck asked quietly as they clinched briefly. Tom's competitive instinct flared. He broke the clinch aggressively, launching another combination. This time, however, Chuck didn't simply evade. He countered with precision, a quick strike to the body that landed with enough impact to draw a sharp intake of breath from Tom. The crowd sensed the shift. What had begun as a demonstration was becoming something more authentic, not brutal, but genuine. The artificial container of exhibition match was giving way to a truer exchange. Dana's commentary captured the transformation. What we're witnessing now is no longer just a charity exhibition. It's becoming a genuine dialogue between two physical philosophies, Hollywood precision versus combat reality. Tom, feeling the sting in his ribs, recalibrated. Michael's advice echoed in his mind. Stop performing. For perhaps the first time in decades, Tom Cruise, the actor who had built a career on spectacular physical performance, tried to simply be present in his body without consideration for how it looked. The change was subtle but immediate. His movements became more compact. His focus narrowed to the exchange rather than the impression it created. Chuck, sensing the shift, nodded almost imperceptibly. They engaged again, and this time, something different emerged. Not equality. Chuck's mastery remained evident, but authenticity on both sides. Tom landed a clean jab, earning a look of acknowledgement from Chuck. The older fighter responded with a controlled combination that backed Tom toward the edge of the mat. The second round ended, with both men engaged in a more genuine exchange than anyone had expected. As they returned to their corners, a new energy permeated the room. What had begun as spectacle was evolving into something unexpected, a real moment of transmission between generations and traditions. "He's not fighting me," Tom said to Michael as he Saturday. "He's teaching me." "That's what real masters do," Michael replied. "The question is, are you ready to learn?" Tom's eyes found Chuck across the mat. The legend sat in perfect stillness, conserving energy, maintaining focus. No team fussing over him, no adjustments to make. Just presence. "Final round," the announcer called. Round 3 of this exhibition match. As they met at center mat for the last time, Chuck spoke again, his voice low enough that only Tom could hear. "Control starts when you stop trying to win." Tom might have dismissed the words an hour earlier. Now, with his ribs aching and his Hollywood certainty shaken, he found himself genuinely listening. Not just to the words, but to what Chuck's body had been telling him throughout their exchange. The final round began not with explosive movement, but with mutual assessment. Tom had abandoned his need to dominate visually, while Chuck maintained his efficient minimalism. They circled, engaged, separated a conversation without words. Then Tom attempted something new, not a movie technique, but a genuine fighting approach. His movement was tighter, his intention clearer. Chuck acknowledged the change with the faintest smile, then responded in kind. The exchange that followed was the most authentic of the match. Tom connected with a clean combination that demonstrated real understanding. The crowd, sensing the moment's legitimacy, fell into appreciative silence. Chuck's response was measured, but definitive. He slipped Tom's next attack and countered with a perfectly timed strike to the ribs, the same spot he'd targeted earlier. The impact, while controlled, carried enough force to register deeply. Tom felt something give. Not a break, but a warning. A clear message from body to mind that a line had been crossed. He gasped, instinctively covering the area. Chuck stepped back, giving him space. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, beyond the physical exchange, a recognition on Tom's part, an acknowledgement on Chuck's. The buzzer sounded. The exhibition was over. The crowd, uncertain how to respond to what they'd witnessed, began applauding tentatively. It built gradually, as both men touched gloves one final time. Chuck leaned in close. "Now you understand," he said quietly. Tom, one arm still protecting his injured ribs, found himself nodding. He did understand, though he couldn't yet articulate what exactly had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in how he perceived himself, his career, and the man standing before him. As the announcer declared the exhibition complete and thanked both participants, Tom and Chuck stood side by side. No victor was announced. This hadn't been a competition in any traditional sense. Yet everyone present recognized that something significant had transpired on that mat. Dana's closing commentary captured what many felt. What we just witnessed wasn't about who won or lost. It was about authenticity versus appearance, about the difference between performing strength and embodying it. Tom Cruise came looking for validation and found something more valuable, a lesson in humility and genuine mastery. As they left the mat, Tom moved gingerly, the pain in his ribs, a physical reminder of the evening's deeper impact. Chuck walked beside him briefly, then paused to place a hand on Tom's shoulder. "Ice those ribs," he said. "And remember, real strength doesn't need an audience." With that, he moved away, leaving Tom to absorb not just the physical consequences of their encounter, but the philosophical ones as well. The noise of the gala continued around them, but for Tom, Everything had narrowed to the sharp pain radiating from his ribs and the unsettling clarity that had come with it. Medical staff guided him to a private room off the main ballroom, where a doctor waited to assess the damage. The space was quiet compared to the buzz outside a stark white island in a sea of celebration and confusion. "I need to go back out there," Tom insisted, wincing as the doctor's fingers probed his side. Even through the designer fabric of his compression shirt, the tenderness was unmistakable. "You have at least one cracked rib, possibly two," the doctor replied, her expression professional but concerned. "You need rest, ice, and possibly x-rays. This isn't something to walk off, Mr. Cruz." Tom shook his head, a gesture that sent another lance of pain through his torso. "Just wrap it. I can't disappear now." Despite the pain, something deeper drove him a need to complete whatever transformation had begun on that mat. To face not just Chuck Norris, but the expectations of the crowd, the media, and most importantly, himself. Michael Briggs stood nearby, concern etched across his weathered face. His eyes, which had witnessed decades of Hollywood bravado, now held something Tom rarely saw directed at him: genuine worry. "Tom, nobody expects you to go back out there. The exhibition's over." "It's not over for me," Tom said, grimacing as the doctor applied a temporary compression wrap around his torso. Each winding of the bandage brought both relief and restriction, a physical manifestation of the evening's lesson. "Help me up." Michael exchanged glances with the doctor, who shrugged helplessly. She'd worked with enough celebrities to recognize the futility of arguing with determination like his. 10 minutes, maximum," the doctor conceded, taping the end of the wrap. "Then you're going to the hospital for proper imaging. And no handshakes, no hugs, minimal movement." "That's not a suggestion, Mr. Cruz." Tom nodded, accepting Michael's hand as he stood carefully. The movement sent waves of pain cascading through his side, different from anything he'd experienced on set. Movie injuries happened in controlled environments, with medics standing by, with the comforting knowledge that cut would eventually be called. This pain carried no such assurances. It simply was raw, persistent, unperformative. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked, as they moved slowly toward the door. His hand hovered near Tom's elbow, ready to steady him if needed. Tom paused, one hand braced against the wall. The corridor was empty but for a security guard at the far end, offering a rare moment of genuine privacy. In the silence, Tom found himself confronting questions he'd spent a career avoiding. "I'm thinking I've spent my whole life trying to convince everyone, maybe even myself, that I could do anything. Be anything." He took a careful breath, feeling the restriction of the bandage against his expanding lungs. "Now I need to show I can also lose with dignity." Michael's expression softened. "That's a different kind of strength, Tom. Maybe the only kind that matters right now." Outside in the ballroom, a curious energy had taken hold. The exhibition had defied easy categorization. It wasn't the flashy performance many had expected, nor was it the one-sided humiliation some had secretly anticipated. What had unfolded was something more subtle, and, for many, more profound: a visible transmission of wisdom through physical dialogue. Dana Lee's voice carried over the sound system as she summarized for viewers at home. What we witnessed tonight wasn't just a physical exchange between two legends from different worlds. It was a visible representation of two philosophies, one built on appearance, the other on essence. Her words hung in the air as Tom and Michael approached the entrance to the main ballroom. The cacophony of voices, the pop of champagne corks, the soft orchestral music playing underneath it all, seemed disconnected from the simple truth Tom now carried in his injured body. "Ready?" Michael asked. Hand on the door. Tom straightened as much as his ribs would allow, finding the posture that minimized the pain. Actually, wait. He reached up to adjust his hair, a habitual gesture before facing cameras, then stopped mid-motion, struck by the absurdity of it. After a moment's consideration, he deliberately mussed his perfect styling, creating a vulnerability in his appearance that matched his physical state. Now I'm ready. As they emerged, a path cleared through the crowd like water parting before a stone. Conversations halted mid-sentence, champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Cameras turned, phones raised, a wall of lenses capturing every careful step, every guarded movement. Tom's progress was visibly measured. One arm held protectively against his side. His trademark fluid motion, replaced by something more tentative. Yet there was something in his expression, a clarity that hadn't been there before, that caught everyone's attention. The perfect Tom Cruise smile, practiced over thousands of red carpets, was absent. In its place was something more honest. Pain, certainly, but also a kind of peace. Whispers followed in his wake. Did Norris really hurt him? Are those broken ribs? Is he coming back for more? Evelyn, his publicist, materialized at his side, her professional calm barely masking panic. Tom, we need to get ahead of this. I've got statements prepared. Not now, Eve, Tom said quietly. But the narrative, let it be what it is. Her eyes widened at the unfamiliar response, but she stepped back, watching as her most controlled client moved through the crowd with newfound authenticity. Across the room, Chuck Norris stood in quiet conversation with several veteran martial artists. Unlike the breathless exclamations elsewhere, their discussion was measured, technical masters analyzing craft rather than spectators consuming entertainment. Chuck looked unchanged by the exhibition, neither tired nor energized, simply present. His posture remained perfect, his movements economical even in casual conversation. When he noticed Tom approaching, he gently excused himself and turned to meet him. The contrast between them was starker now than during the exhibition, Tom's careful movement against Chuck's effortless poise. Tom's evident pain against Chuck's serene composure. They faced each other once more, this time without gloves or referee, without the artificial container of an exhibition match. Just two men. One humbled, one eversage, one injured in body, but awakening in spirit. The other, the living embodiment of hard-earned wisdom. The crowd around them fell silent, creating a bubble of anticipation. Phones recorded, cameras flashed, but for once, Tom wasn't performing for them. His attention was wholly fixed on the man before him. I owe you an apology, Tom said, his voice quiet, but steady. Though pitched for Chuck's ears alone, the silence in their immediate vicinity carried his words further than intended. Chuck's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held compassion. For what? For thinking this was about proving something, for making it about ego. Around them, the nearest observers exchanged glances. This wasn't the expected narrative, the movie star conceding to the martial artist, Tom Cruise acknowledging limitation. It contradicted the carefully constructed mythology that surrounded him. The faintest smile touched Chuck's lips. Most fights are about ego, until they become about truth. Tom nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. Even this small gesture sent fresh pain through his side, a physical reminder of the lesson he'd received. The truth is, I've spent my career blurring the line between illusion and reality. Tonight, you showed me the difference. Something shifted in Chuck's gaze, a recognition, perhaps, that Tom was grasping something genuine from their encounter. He studied Tom for a moment, seeing beyond the celebrity to the man beneath, a man whose identity had been built on extraordinary physical capability, now facing its limits. There's no shame in limitations, Tom. Only in pretending they don't exist. The words landed with the same precision Chuck had shown in the ring, directly to the core. Tom felt their impact not as challenge but as liberation. For decades, his entire persona had been crafted around transcending normal human constraints, pushing beyond what others thought possible. The admission of limitation should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt strangely like freedom. Around them, the crowd maintained a respectful distance. But phones recorded every moment. Cameras captured every exchange. Alex Rivera hovered nearby, sensing a viral moment in the making, but even he remained silent, understanding that something authentic was transpiring. "I'd like to propose something," Tom said, straightening despite the pain in his side. The motion cost him a sharp intake of breath, betrayed the effort it required, but he maintained his posture, finding dignity in the struggle rather than denying it. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Chuck's expression didn't change, but a question formed in his eyes. "Not to fight again," Tom clarified, seeing the subtle shift. "But to train. With you. Not for cameras or publicity. Just to learn." For the first time that evening, genuine surprise registered on Chuck's face, quickly replaced by thoughtful consideration. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Tom's sincerity. He hadn't expected this, not from Tom Cruise, the ultimate Hollywood action hero, not from the man whose career had been built on spectacular physical performance rather than quiet mastery. "Training isn't about learning techniques," Chuck said finally, his voice carrying the weight of decades of earned wisdom. "It's about unlearning ego." The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the unexpected exchange. Among them, Dana Lee stood with a microphone lowered, choosing to observe rather than narrate. She recognized what was unfolding, not just a conversation between celebrities, but a moment of genuine transmission across generations and traditions. "I think," Tom replied with a tentative smile, "I've had a good first lesson in that tonight." He gestured slightly toward his injured ribs, then grimaced at the movement. Chuck considered the proposal, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Then, with deliberate intention, he extended his hand. "Then, we have somewhere to start." Their handshake was captured by dozens of cameras, but neither man played to the audience. Something had shifted for Tom, a recognition that authentic strength came not from proving oneself, but from acknowledging truth. For Chuck, a recognition of genuine humility emerging from an unexpected place. The moment was broken by Michael Briggs stepping forward. Protective instinct overriding the significance of the exchange. "I hate to interrupt, but he needs to get to a hospital. Doctor's orders." Chuck nodded, releasing Tom's hand. "Take care of those ribs. Healing is part of the discipline, too." As Tom turned to leave, escorted by Michael and the medical team that had materialized at his side, the crowd parted once more. Phones flashed. Questions were called out by reporters who sensed a story evolving beyond the expected narrative. But Tom moved through it all with a new quality, not the practiced charm of a movie star, but the quiet dignity of someone who had faced a truth about himself and emerged changed. In the limousine headed toward Cedars-Sinai, Tom leaned carefully against the leather seat, eyes closed against waves of pain. The vehicle's gentle motion, usually unnoticeable, sent fresh reminders with every turn and bump in the road. "I've broken bones before," he said to Michael, who sat watchfully opposite. "On set. During stunts. This feels different," Michael observed, studying his friend and client of 20 years. Tom opened his eyes, looking out at the passing lights of Los Angeles, the city where illusion and reality danced together endlessly. Studio lots where fantasy was manufactured with meticulous care. Billboards where his own face had loomed larger than life, promising the impossible made visible. It is different. Before, every injury was in service of creating something that looked real. This, he gestured toward his ribs, the movement cautious now, respectful of his body's protest. This is just real. Michael studied his friend, seeing changes that went beyond the physical. In 2 decades of collaboration, he'd watched Tom push himself to extraordinary lengths, always in service of spectacle, always with one eye on how it would play on screen. This was something new, pain without performance, consequence without cameras. What will you tell the press? They'll be waiting at the hospital. They'll want the story. Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering. His entire career had been built on controlling narratives, managing perceptions, blurring the line between Tom Cruise the man and Tom Cruise the phenomenon. What happened tonight threatened that carefully maintained illusion, not just the injury, but the visible lesson in humility. Outside, the Los Angeles night slid by a city built on dreams and illusions, on the gap between appearance and reality. For decades, Tom had been one of its most successful navigators, a master at controlling how the world saw him. Tonight, that control had been gently but firmly taken from his hands. "I'll tell them the truth," he said finally, finding unexpected comfort in the simplicity of that approach. "That I went looking for validation and found education instead." He smiled faintly, the expression more genuine for its imperfection. That real strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after you've been knocked down. Michael nodded, seeing something new emerging in his friend, not the calculated vulnerability that sometimes featured in interviews, but authentic recognition of limitation. That's going to change some narratives. Maybe they need changing. As the limousine pulled up to the hospital entrance, where indeed reporters had already gathered, Tom Cruise prepared to face a different kind of spotlight, one that illuminated not just his undiminished courage, but his newly discovered humility. In that moment, with his ribs throbbing and his perspective forever altered, Tom understood what Chuck had been trying to teach him from the beginning. True mastery begins not with domination of others, but with honest recognition of oneself. Not with exceeding limitations, but with acknowledging them. Not with performance, but with truth. And that, perhaps, was the most challenging stunt of all. 3 weeks after the now famous exhibition match, a nondescript SUV pulled up to the modest dojo in Culver City, where Chuck Norris had taught for the past 15 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, illuminating a building that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming high-rises and trendy fitness centers that dominated Los Angeles's wellness landscape. The dojo, housed in a converted warehouse with simple signage and weathered brick, embodied the same understated authenticity as its master. The driver's side door opened, and Tom Cruise emerged, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still healing from injury. Each movement was measured, respectful of the body's ongoing repair. The bruising along his ribs had faded from angry purple to yellowing green, but the deeper lesson those injuries had taught remained vivid and clear. He wore no designer clothes, no watch worth more than a car, just simple training attire and an expression of quiet determination. For perhaps the first time in decades, he had made no concession to public appearance. No carefully selected casual but premium athletic wear. No stylist-approved understated look that paradoxically drew more attention. This morning, Tom Cruise was dressed not for cameras but for practicality. The media frenzy that had followed the showdown, as it had been dubbed online, had mostly subsided, though footage of their exchange had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. What had begun as a publicity stunt had become something culturally significant, a visible allegory about authenticity versus performance that resonated far beyond martial arts circles. Entertainment shows had run the footage on loop for days. Social media had exploded with analysis, memes, and unexpected philosophical discussions about performative strength versus authentic mastery. Sports commentators and cultural critics alike had found meaning in the exchange that transcended its physical dimensions. Tom paused outside the dojo entrance, taking a deep breath. His ribs still ached when he moved too quickly. A physical reminder of the lesson he'd received. The X-rays had confirmed 2 cracked ribs, not severe enough to require anything beyond time and care, but significant enough to ensure he wouldn't soon forget. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, leaving behind the cacophony of Los Angeles traffic for the quiet intensity of focused practice. The transition was jarring from a world where his presence invariably created disruption to one where his celebrity held no currency. Inside, the dojo was nothing like the high-tech training facilities Tom was accustomed to. No mirrors lined the walls, no specialized equipment filled the space. Just clean mats, simple training tools, and students of various ages practicing with focused attention. The absence of mirrors was particularly striking. There was no way to watch oneself perform, no opportunity to adjust based on appearance rather than effectiveness. Chuck stood in the center, guiding an elderly veteran through a gentle kata. His instructions minimal but precise. "Breathe from your center," he was saying, his voice soft but carrying clearly across the space. "The movement follows the breath, not the other way around." When Tom entered, a ripple of recognition moved through the room, but no one approached or called out. Several students glanced his way, then returned to their practice with disciplined focus. Chuck completed his instruction before acknowledging his visitor with a small nod. He spoke quietly to his senior student, then crossed to where Tom waited. "You came," Chuck said simply, neither surprised nor particularly impressed. "I said I would." Tom glanced around the dojo, taking in its understated functionality. No complex equipment, no technological aids, nothing to distract from the essential work of mastery. "Different from what I'm used to." "That's the point." Chuck gestured for Tom to follow him to a small office at the back of the space. Inside, the walls were adorned not with championship trophies or celebrity photos, but with simple calligraphy principles rather than accolades. "The way of the peaceful warrior," read one. "Empty your cup," stated another. They sat across from each other at a modest desk. Chuck studied Tom with the same penetrating gaze he'd shown the night of their exhibition, seeing beyond the celebrity to the man within. His assessment was neither critical nor approving, simply observant, present, aware. "How are the ribs?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to where Tom's hand unconsciously rested against his side. "Healing," Tom replied. "The doctor says I should be careful for another month, no intense activity." Chuck nodded. "Pain is a teacher, sometimes the most important one." "I've been thinking about what happened," Tom said, meeting Chuck's gaze directly. The statement was offered without performance, without the practiced vulnerability he might have shown in an interview. Just simple truth. And what was that? Chuck's question held genuine curiosity beneath its simplicity. Tom considered his words carefully. For a man who had spent decades with teams of publicists crafting every public utterance, speaking without calculation felt both foreign and strangely liberating. "All my life, I've pushed against limits, defied expectations, done the impossible stunt, the dangerous sequence, the thing everyone said couldn't be done." Chuck listened without comment, his weathered face impassive. "I thought that was strength," Tom continued. "But what you showed me was different. It wasn't about what you could do, it was about—" He paused, searching for the right words. "About being centered in who you are, not proving anything to anyone." A faint smile crossed Chuck's weathered face, the first real expression Tom had seen from him. "That's a good place to start." "I'd like to learn more," Tom said. "Not for a role, not for the cameras. For myself." Chuck considered the request, his expression thoughtful. The proposition wasn't simple. Tom Cruise was not just a potential student but a global celebrity whose presence would inevitably affect the dojo's atmosphere. Moreover, Hollywood's relationship with martial arts had historically been superficial, focused on spectacle rather than substance, on appearance rather than essence. Training here isn't about techniques or fighting, Chuck said finally. It's about discipline, awareness, and service. Service? The concept seemed to catch Tom by surprise. Chuck gestured toward the main dojo space, visible through the office window. Students continued their practice, a teenager helping an elderly man with his balance, a middle-aged woman guiding a child through a simple form. Veterans of varying ages working through movements with deliberate focus. These are veterans with PTSD, kids from difficult backgrounds, people looking to find balance in their lives. They're not here to become fighters. They're here to become whole. Tom watched as a young man with a prosthetic leg moved through a kata with painstaking precision, his focus absolute. Nearby, an older veteran with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much worked slowly through breathing exercises, his hands trembling slightly but growing steadier with each exhale. They don't care about Tom Cruise the movie star, Chuck continued. They care about finding something they've lost: center, balance, peace. Tom nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You're not teaching martial arts. You're teaching life. The best fighting technique is the one you never have to use, Chuck replied. True strength isn't in domination. It's in elevating others. Outside the office, the dojo had returned to its rhythm. The initial surprise at Tom's appearance giving way to focused practice. Through the open door, Tom watched as a teenage girl helped a young boy adjust his stance. The kind of quiet interaction that happened 1,000 times a day in this space. Far from cameras or public recognition, there was something profoundly moving in its simplicity. Its lack of pretense. I can't promise I'll be a good student, Tom said finally, turning back to Chuck. I've spent decades learning a different way of moving, of being. My body knows stunts, not substance. Performance, not practice. That's why you need to start as a beginner, Chuck replied. His tone, matter of fact, without the burden of being Tom Cruise. The proposition was both simple and radical: to step away from the identity he'd spent a lifetime building, to accept limitation and learn something new without the safety net of celebrity. It challenged not just his physical approach but his fundamental sense of self. For a moment, doubt flickered across Tom's face. His entire adult life had been built around exceptional capability, around the narrative of someone who could master anything through sheer will and work ethic. To begin again as a novice, especially in a discipline where his age and injuries placed natural constraints on progress, it contradicted everything that defined him publicly. But something had shifted that night on the mat. The certainties that had driven him for decades had been gently but irrevocably disrupted. What remained was a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask. Who was Tom Cruise when stripped of exceptional achievement? When the cameras were gone and the spectacular feats impossible? When can I start? Tom asked, the question carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. Chuck rose from his chair with that same fluid grace that had so impressed Tom during their exhibition. You already have. Over the following months, a remarkable transformation unfolded not in front of cameras, but in the quiet confines of Chuck's dojo. 3 mornings a week, Tom Cruise arrived alone, parked his unassuming vehicle, and joined the first class of the day. No entourage, no special treatment, just another student on the mat. The first sessions were humbling in ways Tom hadn't anticipated. His body, trained for decades to move in ways that photographed well, resisted the more efficient, less visual techniques Chuck taught. Movements that should have been simple became awkward challenges. Postures that appeared elementary revealed fundamental weaknesses in his foundation. "You're still performing," Chuck observed during their third session, watching Tom struggle with a basic stance. "You're thinking about how it looks rather than how it functions." Tom nodded, frustration evident despite his determination. "Hard to break the habit of a lifetime." "That's why we start with the simplest things," Chuck replied. "Standing correctly, breathing fully, moving honestly." The mental adjustment proved even more difficult than the physical. Tom had built a career on controlling outcomes, on perfectionism, on mastering challenges through sheer force of will and work ethic. Chuck's approach required the opposite, surrendering control, accepting limitation, finding strength in yielding rather than forcing. "Your mind is still trying to win," Chuck told him one morning, after Tom had pushed himself too hard and aggravated his healing ribs. "There is no winning here. Only understanding." Gradually, something shifted. The change was subtle at first, moments of genuine presence replacing performance, flashes of understanding piercing through the habitual need to excel. Tom began to grasp that the dojo offered something he'd never found on set, something no amount of spectacular stunts could provide. The opportunity to be present without pressure, to learn without expectations. The other students, initially wary of the celebrity in their midst, began to accept his presence as he demonstrated his commitment. They saw not Tom Cruise, the action star, but Tom, the student struggling, learning, occasionally failing, persistently returning. His dedication earned their respect in a way his fame never could. Dana Lee, whose commentary on the night of the exhibition had earned widespread praise for its insight, was one of the few journalists permitted to observe a training session 3 months into Tom's new practice. Her presence was allowed only after Tom himself requested it. Recognizing that the story of his journey might have value beyond his personal transformation. "What strikes me most," she wrote in her subsequent article, "is not the physical training, but the philosophical transformation taking place." Tom Cruise, perhaps the most visually kinetic actor of his generation, is learning to be still, to find power in restraint rather than explosion, to value what works over what looks impressive. The piece, published in Sports Illustrated, captured something that resonated far beyond martial arts circles. A parable about authenticity in an age of performance, about substance beneath style. It presented Tom not as a celebrity dabbling in martial arts, but as a genuine student undergoing fundamental change. The humility required to begin again as a beginner, especially for someone defined by exceptional mastery, shouldn't be underestimated. Dana wrote, "There is a courage in Tom's journey that has nothing to do with physical risk and everything to do with identity risk." For Tom himself, the journey became increasingly personal. Away from the dojo, his career continued, scripts were read, productions planned. But something fundamental had shifted in his approach. In meetings with directors, he asked different questions. Rather than focusing on how to make action sequences more spectacular, he found himself concerned with making them more authentic. "It's not about bigger explosions or higher jumps anymore," he told a filmmaker during pre-production for his next project. "It's about finding the truth in the movement, the necessity rather than the spectacle." The director had looked at him quizzically. "Since when do you care about subtle?" Tom had smiled. "Since I learned that real power doesn't need to announce itself." Michael Briggs noticed the change during pre-production for the film. "You're different," he observed as they reviewed stunt concepts. "More grounded." Tom smiled. "Chuck would say I'm finally learning to stand properly." The real test came 6 months after the exhibition, when Chuck invited Tom to assist with the veterans class, not as a celebrity guest, but as a senior student helping newcomers. The men and women in the class, many dealing with profound physical and psychological injuries, didn't care about Tom Cruise, the movie star. They cared only about whether his guidance helped them find balance, physically and mentally. I was skeptical when he first showed up. Marcus, Chuck's senior student, admitted to a documentary filmmaker who was recording the dojo's work with veterans. I thought it was a publicity stunt or research for a role. But he's put in the work. Day after day. No cameras. No fanfare. Just training and learning like everyone else. The filmmaker, capturing B-roll for the documentary, asked if they could interview Tom about his experience. The request went through proper channels, agents, publicists, the machinery that managed access to one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The answer came back as a surprise to everyone involved. Tom would participate, but only as one student among many. No special focus, no featured segment, just another voice in the dojo's community. On the day of the interview, Tom arrived early, helping set up the mats for the regular morning class before the film crew arrived. When the cameras began rolling, he participated in the session like any other student, following Chuck's instructions, helping newer members when asked, focusing on his own practice when not. During his brief interview, seated cross-legged on the mat like all the others, Tom spoke with a clarity and authenticity that struck everyone present. What happened that night with Chuck wasn't just about fighting, he explained, his expression thoughtful rather than camera-ready. It was about recognizing the difference between appearing strong and being strong, between performing discipline and embodying it. The interviewer, clearly expecting the polished charisma Tom Cruise was known for, seemed momentarily disoriented by his unvarnished sincerity. "Do you regret the exhibition match, given the physical and public consequences?" Tom shook his head. "Some lessons you can only learn through experience. Chuck could have told me what he needed to tell me, but I wouldn't have heard it. I needed to feel it literally and figuratively." "And what was that lesson?" the interviewer pressed. Tom glanced across the dojo to where Chuck was quietly correcting a student's form, his movements economical, his presence centered, his focus absolute. That real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses or validation. It simply is. The documentary, when released later that year, presented Tom's story as just one thread in a larger tapestry of transformation through disciplined practice. Critics and viewers alike noted that the most striking aspect wasn't the celebrity element, but how organically Tom's journey fit alongside those of the veterans, troubled youth, and others who had found healing through Chuck's teaching. For the wider public, the whole episode, from the initial challenge to the unexpected outcome to Tom's continued training, became something of a cultural touchstone. Memes and clips circulated endlessly, but beneath the viral surface, a genuine conversation had begun about authenticity versus image, about substance versus spectacle, in an increasingly performative society. 1 year to the day after the showdown, Tom arrived at the dojo to find Chuck waiting alone in the empty space. The morning light filtered through high windows, creating pools of brightness on the worn mats. The air held the quietude of a space dedicated to presence rather than distraction. "No class today?" Tom asked, setting down his bag. Chuck shook his head. "I thought we might talk. It's been a year." They sat together in the center of the training floor, two men whose lives and legacies had become unexpectedly intertwined. Chuck, at 86, moved with the same fluid control that had made him a legend. Tom, though still powerfully built, had developed a different quality of movement, less performative, more centered. "I've been thinking about what to say today," Chuck began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of earned wisdom. "About how to mark this anniversary." Tom waited, having learned the value of patient silence. "A year ago, you came looking for validation," Chuck continued. "To prove something to the world. Perhaps to yourself. Tom nodded. And you showed me how little I understood about real strength. Not just strength, Chuck corrected gently. Understanding. The greatest fighters I've known weren't those who could defeat anyone. They were those who understood there was always more to learn, always another level of awareness to achieve. He rose to his feet with characteristic grace, indicating for Tom to join him. Standing face to face in the empty dojo, the contrast between them remained, but it had evolved from opposition to complementarity. Both men embodied discipline, but in different forms. Both demonstrated mastery, but of different kinds. Show me the first form I taught you, Chuck instructed. Tom moved through the sequence, not with the flashy precision of a movie star performing martial arts, but with the authentic focus of a dedicated student. His movements were clean, efficient, rooted. The transformation from a year before was evident not in spectacular capability but in honest presence. When he finished, Chuck nodded once. A year ago, you came here thinking you knew what fighting was. What do you think now? Tom considered the question carefully, giving it the respect it deserved. I think. I've spent my life performing power. You've spent yours embodying it. And the difference? Performance needs an audience. Embodiment is for yourself. Chuck smiled. A rare, full expression that transformed his weathered face. There's hope for you yet. Outside the dojo, Los Angeles continued its eternal dance of illusion and reality. Studios produced fantasies, celebrities maintained personas, the machinery of entertainment transformed life into spectacle. But within these walls, something different had taken root, a recognition that beneath the noise and flash of modern life, deeper truths waited for those with the courage to face them. As they prepared for the day's first class, students beginning to arrive, Tom realized that the most valuable thing he had gained wasn't new fighting techniques or physical discipline. It was perspective, the ability to see himself clearly, to recognize the difference between the image he had projected and the man he truly was. Chuck, reading his thoughts as he often seemed to do, placed a hand briefly on Tom's shoulder. The strongest opponents we face are not others, he said quietly. They are our own illusions about ourselves. Tom nodded, understanding now what he couldn't have grasped a year before. The exhibition match hadn't been a defeat. It had been an invitation to step beyond performance into authenticity, beyond appearance into essence. As the dojo filled with students of all ages and backgrounds, Tom took his place among them, not at the front as a celebrity, nor at the back as an observer, but simply as one practitioner among many, seeking not to prove but to understand, not to conquer, but to learn. And in that simple positioning present, attentive, humble, lay the most profound lesson Chuck Norris had taught him. That true mastery begins when the need to master others ends. The morning class began with a ritual bow, an acknowledgement not of hierarchy but of mutual respect. As Tom straightened from the gesture, he caught Chuck's eye across the room and saw in the old master's gaze both approval and challenge. The journey wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be. But for the man who had spent a lifetime pushing beyond boundaries, the most liberating discovery had been learning to accept them not as limitations to overcome, but as truths to embrace. His ribs had healed long ago, but the lesson remained, embodied in every breath, every movement, every moment of clarity. Real strength isn't proven. It simply is. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.